The episode opens with, the great hero and the demon lord had a great battle. The demon lord tried to mock the hero, claiming that if he fails, the world will end. The hero grabbed a small rock and thought it was all he had remained. The demon lord unleashed all his power and thrown a huge boulder toward the hero, but the hero countered it by using his small pebble to destroy it. The hero was tired of small games and wanted to finish it all. The demon lord accepted, and they pointed their sword toward each other using their most powerful abilities. The two engaged in the last confrontation. After several clashes, both were exhausted to the point that the hero's hair turned white. Moved by their desires, the two slowly walked forward and stabbed each other. They collapsed, yet the hero was relieved that everything was over. Fast forwarding to the future, we see a young boy happy to join school. He notices the students greeting each other and asks if that's what friends do. He feels relieved because that's what normal people are supposed to do. But young boy is none other than Blade, the hero who defeated the Demon King. He jumps in happiness, mentioning that he will make friends and live as a normal person from now on. Blade happily walked in the hallway telling himself that it was time to make some friends. He greets every random person he walks by and notices some students talking about how he seems a transferred student. He notices it and introduces himself and finds out they're called Cassim, Clay, Jessica, and Claire. He reveals that he's there to make friends in the 4 except. Blade is happy that he now has 4 friends, but now he aims to have 100 friends. Claire tells him that for that he needs to befriend all students. Suddenly, the girl interrupts their conversation to ask why Blade is creating a commotion. She says that they are all students at the Rosewood Academy, an academy that creates heroes, so they should follow rules and order. The group reveals that she's Arnis Flaming, the strongest student in school, and is called the Empress. Yet Blade simply introduces himself with a big smile, but earnest and care. She asks who the hell he is. Claire tries to explain that Blade just transferred in, but Arnis still doesn't care, claiming that this school only admits people who want to be heroes, and they shouldn't accept late admissions. Blade drops the ball when he mentions he doesn't care about becoming a hero. He's only here to make friends. Arnis goes on a tantrum because he doesn't have any resolve to protect people. Blade doesn't care and asks her to take him to the principal's office. She shows him the way and knocks the door. The principal tells them to get in, and when Arnis sees the principal's face, she bows down in respect. Blade doesn't care about it and talks to the principal in a casual tone. Arnis grabs his leg and calls him an idiot. She asks if he knows who the principal is, and Blade is like, sure I do. She then starts begging the principal to forgive the new student because he doesn't know that the principal is the king. The king laughs it off, mentioning that he heard about Arnis from the previous headmaster, and reveals that he's now the new school principal. Arnis starts complimenting the king like any loyal subordinate would do, but she almost never ends licking his boots quietly. The king tells her that's enough and that she should leave because he needs to speak to Blade in private. She gets out and gets mad because Blade treats the king just like a casual friend. Blade then blames the king because he just got on her bad side because of the whole situation. He asks the king what he is doing here, and the king reveals that Blade lost his powers after the fight with the Demon Lord, and he wants him to regain his hero powers. Blade gets annoyed because he wants to be an ordinary person, but the king ignores him, calling this school just a rehabilitation center for Blade. The king continues ignoring Blade and explains he will change the school curriculum. He wants to create great heroes just like Blade was. The young boy tries to dismiss it as unnecessary because the Demon King is dead. The king mentions the report about Blade's last battle against the Demon King, resulting on both losing their powers, yet he believes that there's a way to restore Blade's power. Blade is still pretty annoying because the king always acted like this, but he decides to ignore it. Blade returns to class where everyone is doing their own thing. He notices Arnis and tries to talk to her. She asks him what is he doing in the S class. Blade explains he took the exam for F classes, but he was told to come here. She thinks he bribed someone to get into the school and the S class. She explains that this isn't a school that admits people half-hearted to get in, and claims that he cheated. Blade claims he's dead serious in this school. He wants to make 100 friends. He starts introducing himself to every person around, claiming he wants to be friends with them. Arnis gets annoyed by his actions, but he suddenly pats her head. She gets shy and tries to attack him with her sword, but Blade swiftly jumps to dodge her attack. Another student named Sophie interrupts them to tell that the instructor told them to assemble. Blade introduces himself to her twice, but she only ignores him. Arnis then explains what he's doing, and the girl introduces herself as Sophie. Blade starts shaking her hand, yet Arnis calls the instructor. She tells that she wants to test Blade's ability. The teacher tries to stop it. With surrenders after being intimidated, she gets an enchanted metal armor and tells that every S-class student can easily slice through it. She tells that he must also do it to prove his power or he must leave the academy. She tries to explain that S-class is on a different level compared to the remaining ones, but Blade is like, how many levels are we talking about? She replies that they're at least 3 levels above the rest. Blade is slightly impressed and decides to use his second sword skill. He unleashes his fighting spirit, impressing everyone around. They notice it's the rarest and strongest Dragon Series spirit. Blade accumulates the power around his sword and unleashes the skilled Dragon Eater. This is a wind skill that not only completely crushes the enchanted armor into dust, as it also rips off Arnest's clothes and knocks every student except for Sophie against the wall. Arnest then comes back and asks how the hell is Blade. After looking around, Blade notices what happened and apologizes, claiming that he's an ordinary person. The class ends and it's lunchtime. Arnest is eating alone in her spot. Blade decides to join her and calls his friends to join them, but they all refuse to. Arnest explains that table is reserved for her, but he confuses the situation. He asks if she's being bullied, but she calls him an idiot and reveals that everyone is afraid of her. He wants to know why, but she ignores him. After tasting his food, Blade starts to eat like he never had a meal in his life. She's confused because it's just curry. Yet she apologized for telling that he bribed someone to join the school, but Blade didn't even remember that situation. She admits that he has some talent, but Blade is focused on his food. On the other hand, Blade thanks her because she helped him realize as his dream of having friends. She's confused what he tells that since they're eating together, they're now friends. Arnest gets as red as tomato, and tells that she doesn't mind being his friend. Later, at night, Arnest gets back to her room and reflects on his words. She initially calls him an idiot, but then starts rolling on her bed, happy that she managed to make her first friend. Suddenly, her sword starts shacking, making her remember her past. When she was younger, she immediately felt an attraction toward her sword. When she approached the sword, told her to surrender herself to it, Arnest fell into those words and picked up the sword. Her hair turned from black to red, and since then the sword has been filling her mind with words to destroy, slash, and burn. The sword repeats those words, but Arnest tells it to shut up. She's the next head of her family, and she won't give in to the demonic sword. She manages to calm down the sword and felt determined to get stronger. The next day, they continue their practice lessons, but she's annoyed that her opponent is not taking the fight seriously. This guy is the type of playboy who doesn't want a lady to get hurt. The guy then falls back to activate the power of his lands, which Blade thinks it's amazing and rushes forward, just to get thrown away. The guy puts his playboy phase and admits defeat, but suddenly Arnest loses control, is about to kill him. She manages to stop the swing in time and calls for her next opponent. Sophie steps in and the two start their battle. She manages to block Arnest's attacks with her punches and even manages to push her back. Arnest is forced to use a fire skill, and Sophie admits defeat. She then calls Blade to fight her, but he's worried about her condition. She tells that she's fine and gets into her posture, yet she suddenly drops her sword and faints after feeling the sword trying to consume her. Blade manages to catch her in time and takes her to the infirmary. He tries to convince the doctor to make Arnest feel better, just like she did to him after defeating the Demon Lord. But she explains she cannot do something against spells and curses. Arnest then wakes up, confused about what happened. Blade tries to explain, but she gets startled and tries to get up late, stops her, and explains everything. Arnest wants to leave, but the doctor tells her to rest. Blade promises that he will take care of Arnest and helps her get back. She says that she can walk by herself, but Blade tells her that she can lean on him because they're friends. But she simply tells him to keep what happened a secret and walks away. Blade then decides to infiltrate in the data system of the academy to get information about her. He finds out that Arnest has the demon sword name Asmodeus. He decides to call her out to talk in private. She misunderstands his intentions, thinking it's something romantic, but he says that he knows the secret about her sword. Outside, he explains that her sword gives her more power. But since the sword has free will, the sword doesn't accept her as its master. He asks how it did happen, and she explains that she found the sword when she was 6 and the sword tried to take over her body. Since then, she's still trying to battle against the sword urges. Blade then tells the only way to stop it is for the sword to acknowledge her as its owner, but she's afraid to try it because if she fails, the demon will take her body and kills thousands of innocent people. Blade tells her that it's okay. She gets mad, but Blade tells her he can handle it and if it's needed he will destroy the sword. She decides to believe him and starts the ritual to form a pact. Blade watches her from the side as he sees flames surrounding her body. After finishing the chant, the demon sword increases the flames to test her. Arnis sees herself in front of the demon, and she orders it to submit to her. The demon refuses to surrender, forcing them into a fight. The flames start to generate some sort of small demons, wishing to destroy everything. One of the demons tries to attack Blade, but he destroys it with his punch. After watching the scene, Arnis believes the Blade will take care of everything if she fails. She decides to give it her all and decides to go all out against the demon. The two clashes with their powers, and with Blade's support she manages to win the battle and control the sword. Blade catches Arnis as she falls from the sky and congratulates her for succeeding. From that moment on, Arnis changed her habits. She starts to greet students with a smile instead of being moody, all thanks to her first friend Blade. That brings the episode to an end. The story continues as usual until class starts. Blade ends up practicing against two students, but he simply dodges every single attack. Arnis comes to him and tells him to at least draw his sword against his colleagues. She also mentions that he's disrespecting them because he's not even looking at them while fighting, but Blade simply replies that she looks different. She acts flirty, asking how she looks different to him. Blade thinks of all of the moments she was smiling and acting cute, until he simply replies that he doesn't know. Leonard starts attacking Blade while telling him to notice when a girl changes her hairstyle. Of course, Blade didn't even notice it. Arnis reaches a level of depression that says that she didn't want him to notice, but she goes back to serious mode and tells Blade to keep an eye on Sophie. He notices her practicing by herself and asks Arnis why is it. Arnis says that Sophie always practices by herself, but she usually obeys every command she's given. But she never did something she wanted to, except for the time when she told her name to him. Arnis tells him to deal with Sophie while ordering Leonard to work harder. Blade goes to Sophie, introduces himself, and says that Arnis asked him to watch over her training. Sophie asks if that's a command. Blade ends up confused because that wasn't an order, but she asked him to do it. Still, he simply smiles and tells that he wants to help her. Sophie looks at her fists and says that's all she can use. Blade curiously asks why she doesn't use weapons. She simply replies that she was only taught to use her body to fight. Blade promises to teach her other ways to fight. She asks if it's a command. Blade simply replies he's trying to help a friend, and if she doesn't want to, she doesn't need to learn. She's curious about it and decides to give it a try. Blade prepares to practice with her, but the bell rings, signaling their practical training is over. Blade is flustered because they were about to start. Arnis replies that's because he was flirting. Sophie then looks at Blade and gives him a smile. In the next practical training class, Blade teaches Sophie how to use a sword, but she cannot still cut through the armor. Blade tells her to channel her fighting spirit into the sword, just like she does with her fists. He tells her that a sword is just an extension of her body while demonstrating. She easily understands and manages to cut through the armor. Blade tells that if she keeps going, she will be able to use the sword. He decides to call it for a day, but Sophie asks if she will beat Arnis. Blade replies that getting to Arnis' level won't be easy. Suddenly, Sophie throws the sword back at Blade. He grabs it, but Sophie grabs him and throws him to the floor in the next second. She sits on top of him to restrain him and says this way is stronger. Blade agrees and says that he can't move. She replies, while getting her face closer, that she wouldn't be in a good mount position if the enemy could move freely. Blade agrees, and she tells him that she wants to learn something else from him tomorrow. Blade promises he will do it, but first he must visit the school principal. If you don't remember the king asks how school life is going, to which Blade replies that he made some friends. The king feels relieved because Blade became the hero when he was still 3 years old. Don't ask me how. At this point the king even considers Blade his best friend, but Blade wants to be friends with people around his age. The king is curious and asks who Blade's friends are. Blade mentions he's been lately closer to Sophie. The king isn't surprised. He already expected that Blade would be interested in her. The two comment on how strong she is, but the king states that she's still incomplete. Blade is confused, but the king explains their goal for her completed form was to surpass Blade. Blade gets mad and asks what this is about. The king mocks him for befriending her without knowing she was part of the artificial Great Hero project. Blade is once again confused. The king explains that if Blade the Great Hero can exist, then there's also the possibility to create an artificial Great Hero just like him. He basically explains there's a certain group who used ancient forbidden knowledge to create an artificial hero. They took a test subject with the best aptitude and trying to artificially manifest the Great Hero's powers. To make it worse, they created several clones of her for that experiment, and they used them to make new experiments and adjustments. Blade is confused about the clones because he thought they were thinking about Sophie. The king reveals Sophie's real name is Sophicia Femto. Femto signifies 12, which means she's the 12th clone of Sophicia. Blade's eyes are shaking as he cannot believe the truth. The king continues by saying that the original Sophicia show was treated as an object to be experimented on. Blade angrily gets up, but the king explains that he wasn't involved. Plus, he took that organization down. Blade calms down, but the king explains the moment he met Sophie, he took her in and told her that she was free, but she also asked if that was a command, something that hasn't changed since then. Blade rushes back and blames himself because Sophie was robbed of a normal life because they wanted to create a great hero. But now he's decided to make sure she gets her normal life back. The problem is that he doesn't know what's a normal life too. He goes to the infirmary to talk with his medic friend, who's more interested in seeing his body. He asks her what normal means and what's normal for a kid of his age. She's happy that he's curious and she's willing to teach him everything related to the vigor of youth. I'm glad misunderstood her words, because I wouldn't. He goes to Leonard and asks what youth does mean and what it involves. Leonard is also dumb and replies that it means love. Blade dashes away and asks his colleagues what is love and what they do when they're in love. One of them replies that love is about going on dates together. As you guess, it's time for the next victim. He goes to Arnest's room and asks about dates. She misunderstands the whole situation, but due to Blade's insistence, she replies that it's couples spending time alone. They talk, walk around and go shopping, but despite being happily shy about it, she says it's too early for them to go on a date. Blade storms off, telling he will be going on a date. Of course, Arnest wants to know who's the girl stealing her spot. While looking for Sophie, Blade enters the girl's bathroom and asks Sophie on a date. She replies if that's an order. It isn't, but he tells that's important. She smiles and agrees. Of course, girls including Arnest decided to spy on the two while mentioning what happened. The girls are still calling Arnest the Empress, and she tells them to simply call her Arnest. The girls refuse. But Arnest explains their comrades united with one single goal: to keep an eye on Blade and prevent him from doing funny business. I wonder what she means by that. Sophie arrives at the meeting spot on time and tells Blade she doesn't have an idea of what a date is. Blade replies with "Don't worry, I've planned everything." Of course, his agenda sounds more like a mission briefing. The girls think this is too detailed and that it really sounds like a date. He holds onto his arm and they start walking. Arnest and the girls don't like that interaction and end up losing them. Turns out Blade planned to walk around the city, eat some ice cream, visit some spots, run around and even feed the fish. They then go to an arcade to play the punching game. Arnest and the girls are pretty jealous and want to stop them. Why, you ask? Because they destroy the bloody machine. Blade becomes a bit more romantic and the two have to drink from the same fruit at the same time with their straws, but since it's hard to sip, Sophie asks him to get closer to her. Suddenly, Blade jumps away when their faces touch. She asks him what is wrong, but he doesn't understand. Sophie tells him she cannot complete the mission of finishing the drink by herself. He replies that he understands, but his heart is going faster than a race car. They shyly get near each other to finish the drink, and Sophie tells him to get closer. Blade's heart is reaching its limit, but Arnest and the girls are annoyed because they haven't been noticed despite sitting one table away. Arnest's mind is also racing, annoyed by seeing them close. After moving forward with their date, Blade finally starts to feel like someone is following them. They still ignore it and try to move forward with their activities, but Blade notices they're a bit late. Sophie says that it's okay and they will take a shortcut. And by that I mean climbing a building and then jumping among the city buildings, and in the dates, sitting by a fountain where Sophie reveals she had fun today. She then asks why he decided to call her on a date. He wants to tell the truth, but he can't, so he replies that it's because she's his friend. Sophie asks if they're really friends because friends don't keep secrets from each other. Blade thinks he was caught, but she then says that she hasn't told him something. She decides to reveal to him that she isn't a normal human. She explains the whole incomplete test subject story and shows the power she got from it. She says the real hero can change the laws of physics, but she cannot control the power. She falls down and says that she wanted to increase her body weight by 1,000 times. But since she cannot control her power, she actually increased it by 10,000. She also reveals that she can stop time, but she can only use the hero powers for 10 seconds after hearing her whole story. Blade tells her that he won't also keep any secrets from her. She wants to listen to it, and Blade reveals that they used to call him the great hero. Sophie doesn't reply and Blade explains he lost his powers. Since she's silent, he asks if she knew already. She replied that she didn't, but she felt something familiar coming from him. He apologizes to her because he is the reason she became a test subject for this cursed power and lost her normal life. Sophie doesn't understand the curse part. Blade explains that the hero's power is a curse. He never wanted to be the great hero, but he had no choice but to fight because they told him that he could use the power to save people. He started to fight monsters when he was only 3 years old. That was the time his powers had awakened. He became strong and almost died several times, but there were still people he couldn't save. People would be angry at him when he couldn't save their loved ones. Blade starts to cry and Sophie runs toward him to comfort him. She says that even if didn't he want to be it, he was still the great hero. She reveals that after being rescued by the king, she went out on a journey to find out who she was. She mentions all the cities he saved and all the people he also saved. He holds her tight while she tells him to be proud. He says that's impossible, but Sophie replies that she is proud that she took part in the artificial great hero experiment because she wants to become someone like him. After hearing those words, Blade decides that he won't be haunted by his past anymore. The two hold hands and promise that they will keep his real identity a secret. That brings the episode to an end. The story continues with Blade and his fellow classmates were enjoying their lunch in the cafeteria when Ernest mentions Blade had food all over his face. Sophie kindly helped clean his face, making Ernest complain out of jealousy. Her new friends arrive and ask if they can join them. They end up joining them and one of the girls asks for Blade's opinion on their outfits. Blade is confused, but Ernest interrupts and congratulates the group for being promoted in S class to their class. Blade is still confused, and the students mention only S-rank students can dress freely. The girl asks what Blade thinks again, but he thinks she's cold with that outfit. Of course, Leonard is here to pick up girls and tries his best. Ernest tells him to stay down and asks if Blade knew about the news. The king is bringing a magical beast to the school to improve the training. Blade doesn't care about it, which surprises Ernest. He mentions that he couldn't expect less from the old fart king. Suddenly, the ground starts shaking, making the students in panic. Sophie tells Blade they should take everyone to the shelter, but he rushes with his plate still in his hand. They find a dragon. When Blade asks if that's a magical beast, Blade slowly walks forward and the dragon moves into him after seeing him. Ernest prepared to fight, but Sophie stopped her. Blade then suddenly jumps into the air and knocks the dragon down with a punch while telling it to sit. Ernest cannot understand what's going on. How did Leaf deal with the dragon with only one punch? He replies that this dragon is still young, and he must have been scared while being dragged here. He asks if the dragon is hungry and throws his plate inside its mouth, but it's too spicy for the dragon and Blade laughs. The students were amazed at Blade's ability to pacify the dragon with a single blow. Blade tried to downplay it, mentioning this is normal and everyone could do it. Nobody believed him. He says that it's not a great dragon or an ancient one. It's just a baby dragon. Everyone stepped back, scared of him. When the dragon suddenly starts to shine, Ernest tells Blade to look behind, where he sees a little girl. She jumps on him, calling him father, but Blade doesn't understand. She claims she's been looking for him and now wants to play. Blade replies that he's not her father, but he will help her find her parents later. He then asks Ernest the dragon went. She tries to explain the dragon became that little girl, but he says that's impossible. Despite Blade's attempts to convince her otherwise, the girl persisted in her belief that he was her father. Ernest explained the dragon had shape-shifted into the girl and Sophie confirmed this, finally convincing Blade. The girl jumped on him and he asks why is she calling him father. She ignores his question, mentioning his punch is amazing and she couldn't expect less from her father. She clings to him, asking to play, and Blade doesn't know what to do. They then decided to let Blade care for her to prevent her from going on a rampage. While bathing the little girl, whom he named Ku, asked why he gave her that name. Blade explained that he chose after a strong knight who always kept promises. This pleased Ku, because dragons also keep a promise, even if it costs their life. Ernest interrupted the bath and got shy. After seeing his chest, he asks if she did learn anything about the girl. She mentions that magical beasts like dragons are creatures who seek strength. Once they're defeated, their flesh decays, but they leave a fragment of their soul with their knowledge. That fragment then can be incarnated as another entity and copies the shape of the being that defeated them. In short, Blade concludes a dragon can take a human form if defeated by a human. Ernest explains it's rare because most humans cannot defeat a dragon. Blade realizes she's talking about his strength, and he wondered if Ku had been defeated by a human in her past life. Ernest realizes that Blade decided to name the dragon. The girl revealed herself, mentioning she likes her name. Ernest sees Blade was taking a shower with Ku and kicks his face while calling him a pervert. The following day, Ernest was still annoyed, especially because Ku was sitting on Blade's lap. Ku asked him to feed her and Blade did it. Ku mentions she's capable of feeding herself, but being fed by Blade makes it taste better. Claire thinks Ku is cute and tries to feed her, but Ku becomes aggressive, mentioning she won't be friends with weak humans. Blade tells Ku that she's scared Claire, but Ku replies that he should only pay attention to her, his daughter. She mentions that he must give her a good morning kiss, and she must sit on his lap for him to feed her during mealtime, to which he agrees. Every girl is shocked and asks if Blade kisses her in the morning. He mentions he never did it. Ku then mentions Blade spends his time staring at mature female bodies, which she thinks it's unacceptable. The girls take this seriously and confront him, and the boys backstop him. They claim he is guilty and punish him by leaving him alone during training. Ernest recommended that their classmates not worry about him. Blade then notices Ku walking by and asks if she wants to join him. She happily joins, mentioning she doesn't need to trade, but since he asked, she will show off power. The group that just joined their class was told to partner with Blade. Jessica said she wanted to become a spy and asked who could teach her. Blade recommended Sophie, but Ku felt like he was ignoring him and left. He tries to call her up, but she already disappeared. Ku was walking around school and noticed a group of students training. They asked if she wanted to join them and become friends, but Ku replied they were too weak to fight her. She ran away and bumped into Blade. He noticed she was feeling down and asked what was wrong. She dismissed it and told him she was starving. He told her they were going to get some curry. She hugged him and said he knew her too well. After their meal, Blade watches Ku fall asleep. He pokes her face and she holds his finger. Ernest knocks on his door and the two go outside. He explains to her that dragons are tormented by their parents when they're born. They only do that because the child only recognizes their parents due to their strength. Ernest asks if that's the reason why Ku behaves like that. He replies that Ku has been alone since she was born. Ernest tells him that he cannot pretend to be Ku's father for longer. Blade agrees, but he's afraid that Ku will end up truly alone in the world. He asks if Ernest knows how much it hurts to be alone. She then realizes what he's trying to say and now knows that Blade is serious when he decided to take care of Ku. She then asks if Sophie is reassured, revealing that she was listening to everything. Ernest and Sophie were worried about him, and Blade says that things are going well with Ku. The girls head back to avoid any scandalous rumors, but when Blade enters his room, he notices Ku isn't there. He goes to the roof and asks her what's wrong. Ku replies that looking at the moon calms her down. She sees them as representations of parent and child. Blade understands what's going on and asks if she doesn't want to make friends. Ku says he's wrong because dragons are stronger than humans, both physically and mentally. Dragons did not form friendships and they live and die alone. She doesn't need friends, she only needs her parent Blade. Blade plays it around and tells she's indeed strong. The next day, Blade tried to make the king babysit Ku, but it didn't go as planned. The king scared Ku and she ran off, leaving Blade frustrated with the king's antics. Blade returned to his room and heard Ku's voice. He peeked inside to see her playing with toys and acting out a drama with them. He noticed that each toy imitated a personality from one of his friends. Ku's play portrayed Blade seeking friendship from everyone for her sake. She then starts mentioning names of students that Blade never talked to. He realizes those are the other students they passed by while walking around. The toy named Blade then mentions that his daughter managed to make 108 friends. Blade realizes that Ku wishes to have friends, but claims she doesn't. He walks away disappointed that he never noticed it. Ernest approached him, offering to help search for Ku, but she was stunned when Blade started banging his head against the wall repeatedly. She stopped him. She asked him what was wrong. Blade explained that it was challenging for Ku to make friends. Because dragons didn't see weaker beings as equals to be Ku's friend, they would have to defeat her in a fight. He felt powerless to help Ku find the friendship she desired. Ernest urged Blade to rely on her and others instead of trying to handle everything on his own. They made their way to meet the lower classes and ask for their help in the fight. Blade talked about Ku, explaining her desire to befriend them and asking for their assistance in defeating her, but the students knew they couldn't defeat a dragon. Blade begged on his knees for them to become Ku's friends, and Ernest repeated his actions. The remaining students from S class also arrive and beg on their knees. They want Ku to finally get some friends. The students couldn't believe their eyes and ended up agreeing with the requests. The next day, everyone waited for Ku's arrival at the arena. She comes in her dragon form and notices the king watching from afar, enjoying the scene. The secretary asks if a dragon will acknowledge defeat if it's taken down by a large group. but the king thinks it will because dragons know humans work in groups. The king feels sad because Blade won't join the fight, but Blade almost tells Ku that it's okay if she burns the king into crispy royal bacon. He then pats her head and mentions that she couldn't fight when she was captured because of a trap, but this time there are no traps. She can show everyone her strength. She breathes from fire and everyone prepares to start the battle. That brings the episode to an end. Things continue. The students start running away when Ku uses her fire breath and her tail. Ernest uses her magic sword to hit Ku and yells at the student to remember their plan. Somehow they recover their brain and follow the strategy. They surround Ku from all sides and dodge the tail attack. Well, some do, giving the ranged weapon squad a chance to attack. Blade is hyped up because the plan seems to work. While the Trash King is having fun, Ernest orders the long-range squad to attack. When the other squad falls back, the students combine their attacks to hit Ku from all sides. The king's secretary, or whatever she is, ends up being impressed by the students who attack from Ku's blind spots. The king thinks they're working well together, but there's a problem. Ordinary attacks cannot damage a bloody dragon. Blade starts to get worried, yet Ku isn't holding back. Some students are already calling 911 while others are preparing their casket. Ku uses fire while also going Hulk smash. The king feels like Blade is waiting for something, but mentions the battle will end before that. Ku attacks a group with fire, but they dodge. Blade yells this is their chance. Sophie takes this chance to run and punch the hell out of Ku, while Ernest uses her magic sword to deal a fire attack. The king is impressed, mentioning they finally dealt some damage, but Blade's plan still failed. Yet Blade mentions this is enough because Ku lost awareness of her surroundings. The floor suddenly seems to break and Ku ends up being pinned against the floor. The king doesn't understand. He thought they were fighting fair and square. Blade mentions they're fighting fairly because the trap was placed during the battle, not before. Turns out Leonard was the one digging a hole after the battle began. The king realizes the students have been stalling for time, but it's still not enough to win. Blade already knows it and mentions the real battle will begin. The students charge forward and Ku tries to stop them by breathing fire. Ernest uses her Asmodeus sword again, but the sword initially refuses because it's becoming weak. She calls him a wimp and uses fire once again to attack Ku. Leonard finally joins the fight, but Ku's scales are so strong that he gets projected back, but this guy doesn't get his timing right. He's literally trying to flirt with Ernest right now, mentioning he's been running 10 miles a day every day like she asked him to. Ernest doesn't even remember that. Forget about that guy because Ku starts to fly to get out of that situation. Ernest attacks again to force Ku down, and Sophie punches her with her artificial hero gravity manipulation skill to pin Ku down. The king now gets hyped up again and Blade shouts this is the right time. Everyone is tired as hell, and Ernest complains that he's making them work hard. She calls forth for more power from her sword. She's shaking because he cannot take it anymore, but Ernest doesn't care. The sword starts channeling all its power. The king is impressed because he didn't know there was a capable student in their school, but Blade explains it's not only Ernest's powers. He mentions that most people are weak as ants, but with every student they can share their power with Ernest to give her a bigger power. All the students mention they want to become friends with Ku and ask Ernest to give her a beating. After channeling all her power, Ernest attacks Ku, creating a huge explosion. Meanwhile, Blade tells Ku to take a good look because that's the powers that humans have. Ku returns to her human form and looks like she's not only exhausted but also traumatized for life. She's tearing down because she lost, but Blade comes to pat her head and comfort her. She apologized for disappointing him with her defeat. She thinks he will abandon her for being weak, just like dragons do, but Blade mentions he won't abandon her and corrects her. She isn't weak, she only lost because humans were stronger. Following his instructions, she ends up accepting defeat, and Blade asks if she can be friends with everyone. She reveals her attitude, replying that if they insist that much, she will become their friend. Yet Blade chops her on the head, and she shyly asks everyone to become her friend. Everyone smiles and accepts it. In the aftermath, the secretary asks the king what is he scheming. He simply replies that he wants his students to grow up, but with this demonstration, he now wants to take a range, a new training method. Basically, he got his hands on a virtual reality type of magic made by what you all love science, and he's now trying to build it into the school since that last fight. Everyone became close friends with Ku. She now sits on others' laps and Claire tries to feed her. Of course those two together seem weird as hell. While eating, Flame notices something and asks Ernest if there's something different about her. You'll realize the mistake he just made after looking at her. Everyone is startled and tries to call him off, mentioning he cannot say that. Sophie even calls him despicable while the others mention she's not different. What the hell do you mean she isn't different? She was a hot waifu and now looks like she ate Ku's dragon forms. Leonard tries to be the good guy, but Blade is a Sigma. He calls her the three-letter word. Ernest starts tearing down. Well, I guess it wasn't the three-letter word. He probably called her a whale. She cannot take it anymore and runs while crying. Gotta say, that was quite an earthquake. Everyone proclaims Blade guilty, but since he doesn't have common sense, he doesn't understand it. Blade ends up being quite depressed for the next couple days because Ernest didn't leave her room. Ku tried to comfort him, but it wasn't enough. The girls mention that Ernest could even stop being his friend. Blade freaks out. He wants to be her friend. He asks the girls if Ernest would forgive him if he apologized. He tries to run into her room, but Claire stops him. She asks if Blade doesn't know why Ernest is mad at him. To be fair, if it's not that, not even I know. Claire mentions that Blade will probably make Ernest even angrier, so the girls tag along. They knock at Ernest's door and tell her that Blade came to apologize, but there's no reply. They pick-lock the door and get inside Ernest's dark room. They see her on the floor. Seems like she's crying. They ask if she's alright, but Ku has a different reaction. She mentions it looks tasty and asks for some. When the group turns on the light, they find out Ernest was stuffing herself with 3 boxes of pastries. She even tells them to not look at her. Imagine the audacity. She tells the desserts are tasty, and Blade calls them the culprit. Ernest then explains that she's been feeling hungry all the time since their last fight with Ku, and seems like she never realized that delicious pastries existed before. Blade is more interested in what really matters. He asks if she wants to burn some hot calories. Okay, he didn't. He asked if they were still friends. She replies that she didn't want him to see her like that. To be fair, I don't think anyone wants since everything is okay. Blade is like, cool, I'm out then. Claire and Jessica stop him and tell him that if he leaves, Ernest will become a lost cause. So he needs to say something nice and stuff, you know, tell a lie. He gets the idea and only makes it worse by telling Ernest that it's good that she's enjoying the food. He's a lost cause and Jessica begs Leonard for his help. As you might expect, this guy tries to flirt with Ernest while mentioning that he's too poor to pay for a restaurant bill. Blade learns from him and gives into his flirty personality. He grabs her in his shoulder and asks if this is something she cannot deal with alone. He tells her that she should ask for their help. They will train her. Ernest tears down and feels motivated to give another bite in that donut. The only problem is that Big Mama cannot exercise properly anymore. She runs with Blade and Ku, but at this point, if they stop moving, they will be going at the same speed as her. They continue with several exercises with Blade and Ku trying to motivate her, but she's too weak to make it worse. Her special diet meal is literally half an egg, 2 broccoli, and some small fish. The girls around her eating full plates and tell her to cut her calories. She even tries to burn some fat later in the sauna, but she cannot take it anymore. When she gets out, the girls are ready to weigh her. She gets on top and crushes. It turns out, she didn't lose weight, she got more. Blade is curious to know the result, but the girls knock him out. Jessica tells Ernest she must have gained muscle from training, because that's exactly what happens, right? Claire then starts to get the right ideas, like finding a way to raise her metabolic rate. That gives Ernest an idea, so she asks for Blade's help because she wants to try something a bit drastic. She gives him a sword and explains they need to use the testing ground because it's protected by a magic barrier. She pulls her Asmodeus sword out and asks if Blade can praise her if she manages to pull this off and lose some weight. Blade answers yes, and she gets filled with motivation. She tells him that she will be counting on him if something happens, and he's like sure. She then channels all her power into her sword and orders it to consume her body. The sword surrounds her with some huge flames. Their friends notice the huge fire and come mentioning they've been looking for them. Jessica asks if that's Ernest and Blade tells everyone to have faith in her. Suddenly the fire goes down and Ernest's body is back to slim. The only problem is that she has a pair of horns and black eyes, not to mention her new underwear is made of fire. Turns out Asmodeus took this chance to take over her body and is now prepared to destroy the world. That's until Ernest talks again to the demon, explaining she only gave her body fat, not her body, all for the sake of her diet. The demon thinks about it and realizes that this demon's form consumes too much energy. It takes 1 million calories to maintain it for an hour, making Ernest happy about it, until she gets dizzy and collapses because she's hungry. She reaches beast mode and even grows a tail. Claire tells her to not lose humanity, but Ernest rushes to attack her. Blade steps forward and uses his wind skill to stop the fire and return Ernest to normal. She later wakes up in his arms, and he tells her that she did great. They return to their normal lives until they go to Ernest's room because she's missing for the whole day, just to find out she once again is eating like a pig. That brings the episode to an end. The story continues a few days later. Blade returns to the nursery to be examined by the doctor. She tells him that he's slowly recovering about 30%. He's curious if he can use his hero powers again, but explains that he will die if he uses 30% of his full power. He leaves the office and walks around the school and hears Claire calling him. She wants to introduce him to her friend Maria, but Blade interrupts her because he remembers she was part of the magic unit when the students fought Ku. But as you guessed, Blade, a very considerate person, mentioning Maria tripped all the time during training and threw her magic spells in the wrong direction. Literally, this guy is becoming a pure bully. She accepts her fate, mentioning she's clumsy, but Claire mentions Marie has a favor to ask him. Turns out this girl wants Blade to kill her. Well, she explains that she's not human and she wants Blade to kill her if she somehow loses control. Everyone is surprised, yet Blade simply confirms that she's a night demon. Yes, Blade already knew about it. She reveals her pointy ears while saying there's something else inside her. No, it's not what you're thinking, it's just a magical beast. I think this doesn't make it better either. So yeah, that thing is powerful and her cup of British leaf water magically breaks. She worriedly apologizes, mentioning she cannot control her strength. Claire tries to calm her down, but she explains that she has been losing control of herself since she fought against Ku. The only problem is that she has nowhere to go if she gets kicked from the academy. Claire explains they came from the same school and that Marie's parents are gone. That's why Marie wants to deal with those powers, to find a place where she belongs. Blade accepts for one reason: he wants to deal with her inside thing. Okay, for real now, he doesn't have parents. Sophie and Ku join and they will probably create the orphan school club, but the rest also joins, including Ernest, who, as you might notice, she is now slim again. Now all those kids in Africa can eat again. Their plan is to go to the training ground, set up a barrier and stuff. Blade wants Marie to release her power so she can learn how to control it. She refuses to, but he explains if Ernest could do it, then she can also do it. After some encouragement from Ernest, she ends up putting her faith on Blade. She first drops one bracelet, which ends up reducing her power by half. It really smashes the ground until they notice there are 3 more and a necklace that reduces her power by 10. This girl is literally the Demon Lord. Ernest realizes they're in deep stuff and tries to stop her. Too late, Marie's power is unleashed and she freaks out because someone is coming out. Blade tells her to believe them, and she smiles before transforming into what it seems a succubus, but turns out it's the real Demon Lord. The Demon Lord laughs, ordering them to kneel and all the stuff. Yes, mommy, I mean, she's celebrating her rebirth because she will control the world and stuff. Sophie asks if that's really the Demon Lord. Blade tells her it's not, but the crest on her head means otherwise. Ernest quickly pulls her demon sword and transforms into a demon to attack Marie, but the Demon Lord quickly deals with her. Leonard comes forward just to meet the same fate. Sophie decides to jump on her back and use ultimate gravity to pull her down, while Ku uses a fire spell in her dragon form. Sophie collapses after exhausting all her magic power to restrain her, and Ku launches her attack, but the Demon Lord stops it with her hand, turns into a crystal, and throws it back. After seeing all his comrades collapsed, Blade grabs his sword and rushes to hit her. The Demon Lord is confused because he never unsheathed his sword and asks if he's trying to take her out alive. She thinks he's a funny guy and tells him to fight her seriously, or she will kill him. She uses a wind spell to project him against the barrier and says that she will kill him if he doesn't take it seriously. Blade knows he's still recovering, but he cannot give up yet. He finally decides to take it seriously, but she manages to stop his attacks with her bare hands. He steps back and she uses a fire spell, asking him to not die right away. He uses his sword to block the attack, but his blade ends up destroyed. Ernest gets up, showing how hot she can be. I mean, she tells him to use her demonic sword to fight the Demon Lord. Asmodeus tells him that he doesn't want to do it, but since Ernest ordered him, he doesn't have many options. The Demon Lord thinks she will now have an amusing fight, but Blade couldn't care less. His goal is to finish it with his next blow. She mocks him for his words and tells him to show her what he can do. Blade channels his power, but Asmodeus tells him to stop because he cannot handle Blade's immense power, of course. Blade ignores it and uses his full power against the Demon Lord. She manages to block it with a barrier, thinking it was too simple until she notices her spell breaking apart. She cannot believe her eyes, and Blade manages to defeat her with his full power. He's happy that nobody ended up dying, but he soon collapses. He later wakes up in the nurse's office, where the doctor quickly hugs him while calling him an idiot. Despite being injured, he's enjoying life. She asks him why she's always making her worry about him and explains that he died for some seconds. If she didn't arrive in time, he would never wake up again. She calls him a liar because he promised that he would never make her cry again, but he failed. He apologizes and asks about the others. The doctor reveals they're all safe and Claire is treating them. He then asks about Marie, who is also alive. A day later, everything returns to normal. Well, not everything. Turns out Maria is still in her Demon Lord form. She greets Blade as the hero, but he tries to shut her up. She now has something to use against him in the future, and Blade tells Maria she should stop. She then explains that Maria is a different personality, and Blade asks the Demon Lord for her name, but she was never given one. Blade decides to check it with the king, who reveals that he was aware of Maria's identity. He explains Maria's mother was a human, and her father is the former Demon Lord, the one Blade has defeated. The Demon Lord's daughter quickly adapted to her new life, especially because she claims to be an ordinary young girl. Jessica complains, mentioning she just wants to wear cute clothes. Yet the Demon Lord's daughter simply flashes at the boys. The students began calling her Mouth, and she says that she one day wants a rematch against Blade. She heads to class and Claire gets worried that she will never see Maria again. At night, Ma knocks on Blade's window while Ku is sleeping. She wants to invite him on a date and grabs him to fly him up. She keeps calling him the great hero and mentions that Maria spent most of her time looking at the moon. Blade asks how old is she, and she mentions that she became self-aware 5 years ago. Blade is confused because she's 5, but she explains magical beasts don't care about age. She takes him to the roof, saying a lady doesn't want to be treated as a child. Blade is confused with the lady part, and she's like, "Can't you see?" As you know, Blade is too dumb to understand. She feels bad because she feels attached to him, but he doesn't notice her. She then reveals that she only stayed in this school because of him. He thought she was enjoying her school life, which she also admits, but she mentions that a magical beast always looks for strength. She admits being attached to him, but she doesn't understand why, especially because she feels that he's weaker than he was in the last couple of days. Blade reveals that if he uses 15% of his power, he will die. She then says that he's not worthy of being killed by her right now, but she won't leave this school until she kills him. She holds his hand and reveals that she has been thinking of a theory that she perhaps loves him. Blade is confused, but she says it's only a possibility. She just wants to test it out. She blushes as she holds his hand and asks if he wants to be her partner. Yet Blade is too young, dumb, and innocent to understand what it means. Turns out she also doesn't because she's 5. Blade thinks it would be easier for them to go to the testing ground and fight each other until they're satisfied. She refuses because of his current condition. Plus, she cannot take out the necklace that restrains her power. She explains Maria's consciousness still inside her and stops her from taking it off. Blade asks about Maria, and Mal explains that she's hiding in the deepest parts of her mind. She mentions that Maria's heart is filled with dark shadows because of her past. She was feared and bullied by humans while she was still a child, and she was forced to hide away with her mother, who always believed her husband would come back. But Maria never believed her father would return. Eventually, her mother died and Maria's mind was filled with doubts. She thought that her father never loved her mother and abandoned them. She thought the Demon Lord was the reason of their suffering. That's when Mal was born, as a way to escape the pain Maria always felt. She says that Maria may never appear again, yet she explains that she only told him this because Blade is closer to a demon than to humanity, something she likes about him. Blade calls it something of the past, and they return to their rooms. A few days later, they studied Mal's necklace just to find out it's not a sealing item. Mal explains she's being restricted by the necklace, and Blade asks for more information about it. Eliza, the one performing the research, mentions that it seems some sort of recording device. Basically, that necklace has some sort of message for Maria. Now mentions that Maria received it from her mother, yet Eliza mentions that the recorded message could bring Maria back and destroy the Demon Lord. Despite the possibilities, Mal decides to accept to play the message because she cares about Maria. Eliza uses a spell to activate the recording, and Claire mentions they could have become friends if Maria and Mal stayed alive. Mal mentions that the ones who remain will be their friends. Eliza orders Now to open up the necklace, and it projects an image of the previous Demon Lord. The Demon Lord initially tries to apologize for leaving Marie and her mother because he had to fight against the great hero. He didn't want them to follow him into a path filled with blood. He left Maria's mother when he noticed that she was pregnant. He had already decided the name for the child and ordered Marie's mother to tell the kid that he was dead. Mal finds Marie deep in her find and asks how long she will be hiding. Marie takes Mal's hand and they listen to their father's message, revealing that he will love both Marie and her mother forever. Mal starts to cry, revealing she cannot control her body because Marie is also crying in her mind. She mentions that she and Marie are fighting to see who gets to survive and that Marie is about to destroy her. Mal tells the group to call Marie's name and the group follows the instructions. Mal loses consciousness and gets on her knees and Marie regains control of the body. She ends up asking Blade to duel her and she turns into Mal. Turns out they managed to find a way to coexist because Marie wished to, but their fight turns out to be strange. Seems like Blade is more interested in flirting with Mal instead of fighting, despite her being 5. That brings the episode to an end. Story continues at the school seemed to be all dark and empty. Blade walks through the corridor with his sword drenched in blood as he remembers all the people he defeated. On his way there he meets Sophie, revealing she always wanted to go in an all-out fight against him. She wonders if she can beat him if she doesn't hold her power back. She activates her power to stop time and lands 3 hits on Blade. But after backing up, she notices that Blade doesn't even move. She wonders why she didn't defeat him. Blade explains that she can attack him several times, but if her hits deal no damage to him. He then pushes her against the wall and reveals he used the technique to momentarily increase his body toughness, and since she stopped time, the technique was active the whole time. Blade then pierces his sword through her stomach and wonders why he's still doing this despite being an ordinary person now. He raises up and shouts to the king to stop what's going on because he believes this is all a spell or a trick. The king shows up in a hologram and reveals this isn't a trick, this is virtual reality. I got you there, didn't I? The king is all happy because of this new technology and tells Blade to use his real power because nobody will be hurt. The Demon Lord and Ku are having the time of their life fighting each other. The king also mentions this is the best way of practical training ever created. So his goal is to improve the students' skills by using this technology because they can fight until their virtual reality death. Blade calls this a sick joke and asks if there isn't a way to make it easier to distinguish between what's virtual and what's real. He thinks this is too realistic, and thinks there are some people who will return to the real world thinking they're still inside virtual reality, and those people can slaughter their own friends thinking it's fake. The king realizes that would be a problem and pushes a lever. The lever changes the background to something like Alice in Wonderland. The king then tells them to continue their fights to the death in this new setting. This is a literal battle royale where the last person standing gets the right to use the virtual reality however they want. Yes, you can finally score a date without many options. Blade decides to end this as fast as possible. Leonard is running happy that he gets to face Ernest just to be sliced in half. This girl became a literal psycho inside the virtual world and starts stabbing Leonard several times. After Leo disappears, she starts moving, wondering where Blade is, talking about our boy. He's just walking around watching how Yasuka and Claire fight against 2 guys. The guys are all happy because the 2 never defeated them while they were still in the lower class, so this is pretty much an easy job. The girls refuse to give up, and Yasuka asks why the guy refuses to lose to them. The boys become embarrassed, you know what's in their heads, and Yasuka takes the opportunity to attack and defeat one of the boys. Claire also strikes the other one, and they finally scored their first win against them. But there's a problem. Ernest is there dragging her sword. Happy that Blade is in the area, she reveals that killing people is fun. Seriously, first she cannot contain her weight, and now she cannot contain her psycho vibes. She calls herself stupid for holding herself back all this time. Blade then recalls that he made her a promise that he would cut her down if she ever went berserk. Just the swing of his sword destroys everything around him. Ernest rushes against him, but Blade randomly swings his sword to create a wind current that stops her. Seconds later, Blade wakes up in the real world with all students staring at him. The king laughs, mentioning that Blade was the last man standing, as expected. Yasuka and Claire don't even know what the hell he just did at the end, but they at least didn't feel any pain. Ernest is crying like a little girl because she can't believe that she went full psycho mode inside. Blade even mocks her, mentioning how she was laughing like a villain. She yells at him to shut up because he's overpowered, despite his claims of being ordinary. The king continues to laugh, thinking that his brilliant idea is giving them the joy of youth, but Ernest complains about the trouble they have faced because of this. The king continues to laugh, as expected, unreliable as hell. Blade approaches the king and starts messing around with the virtual reality system. The king tells him to enjoy his reward until he notices what Blade is doing. Blade is inserting data of ferocious demons, creating booby trap floors, and all the stuff you expect in an apocalypse. Blade then activates the system, and the king asks if those settings aren't too extreme for him, but tells him that it's okay and puts the virtual reality system on the king's head. He then tells the king's assistant to make him respond every time the king dies. She accepts and asks how long the king's punishment should last, and Blade tells her to keep it until nighttime. The students start leaving the area, except the two guys who face Yasuka and Claire. They're literally depressed. Meanwhile, inside the virtual world, the king cannot believe his eyes as he sees tons of demons looking at him. During mealtime, Yasuka and Claire ask the boys why they're depressed. Ernest asks about the situation, and Blade explains they were defeated by the girls. Ernest asks him why the girls won. Blade explains that Claire got better and Yasuka went all out. The boys lost because they thought they were stronger and neglected their training. Some days later, Blade checks a pamphlet revealing the king decided to build a hot spring. He and his friends decide to check the place and meet Dion. They're curious because they don't know what it is, but Dion replies they will know once they get inside. Turns out it's a mixed hot spring where they must wear their swimming clothes. Blade actually enjoys it despite Ku swimming around. Dion reveals 3 hero-level warriors were summoned to build this blade and notices Maria and asks if she isn't the demon lord today. She replies that she cannot let the demon lord out because she would remove the swimsuit, but Blade's 5-year-old mind doesn't get why that's a problem. He then notices that Ernest is missing and asks about it. Turns out she's all shy because it's a mixed bath. The only problem here is the king who decided to go commando. They put some sense of decency on him, but he forbids people from using towels while on the hot spring, targeting Ernest. Turns out the king is still a teenager inside who wants to see the girls. All the boys except Blade decide to join him in his stupid conquests. Yasuka tells Ernest to drop the towel because, let's be fair, everyone has already seen her. The guys all cheer for the moment, even the king, until he gets smacked by his assistant who drags him out. Ernest then takes the towel off and tells Blade to not stare at her. Let's be fair, he didn't even notice her. The other two guys are still depressed, but Yasuka and Claire decide to talk to them. They try to conform to them, but the boys accept that they neglected their training to add salt to the injury. Claire apologizes for winning, and the boys run away crying like little girls. By night, Blade tries to comfort them because they simply lost once. They explain that he doesn't understand them because he never lost to a girl before. In fact, he never lost to anyone. They reveal that they cannot stand the situation because they didn't want to lose to those girls because they like them. Blade doesn't understand the true meaning of those words and says he also likes them. The boys are shocked, thinking he likes Sophie or Ernest, but they later understand what he means when Blade says that he likes everyone. They try to explain what love is to Blade. One of them is into Claire, while the other is into Yasuka. One of them explains he likes Claire because she looks innocent, but she can also be ruthless sometimes. The other one likes how Yasuka looks free and he still likes her despite literally saying that she belongs to the streets. Ku gets inside through the window because you know she heard everything and she has the solution. They just need to become stronger so the girls look up to them. She explains that females are attracted to strong males, so they just need to train the guys think makes sense, but don't know how they can get stronger. That's when Ku reveals they just need Blade to train them. Meanwhile, the girls are enjoying the night, giving Ernest even more cakes to eat. This girl has no salvation, but their conversation switches to the other boys not talking to them. Yasuka doesn't understand why they're behaving like this, and Claire suggests they lose to them next time, but Sophie and Ernest think that won't work. Guess who's back? Back again? It's Ku through the window. She tells the girls that males like strong women, and if the girls get stronger, the boys will be all over them. Yasuka and Claire reveal they have no interest in the boys, and failed Claire then suggests to Yasuka they should miss training so the boys get stronger than them, but Ernest won't allow it. For the next couple of days, the boys train under Blade's supervision. Can someone explain what the hell is this? After completing the training, there's another virtual reality competition. The boys promise that if they win against them, they will confess their feelings. They are at once matched against the girls, while Ernest and Blade are the referees. Yasuka rushes in immediately and Claire follows up. The guys manage to stop their attacks and get the advantage on their counter. Ernest is curious and asks if Blade taught them how to use their fighting spirit, but he explains that he made them realize that they were already using it subconsciously, so he just taught them how to use elements. One of the guys uses wind against Yasuka and the other one tries to attack, but Yasuka uses fire to counter and projects him against Claire, who smacks him on the face. Yasuka then focuses on the other one and uses ice to freeze him in place, followed by a lightning attack. This time the boys accept their defeat and promise they will get stronger than them. Turns out all the girls taught Yasuka and Claire how to use elements just because they were being trained by Blade. Ernest is all made because she's expecting Blade to love her, but she has no hopes of him confessing to her. Of course Blade doesn't understand what the hell is going on. That brings the episode to an end. Thanks for watching episode 6. The rest of the episode will be on my channel. Kindly like the video and share it if you enjoy it.